Hey, and welcome to episode 5 of Think Like a Hacker. We're doing our podcast a little bit early this week because we've got some breaking news, so let's just get straight into it. All right, Mikey, how are you doing?
I'm tired, Mark.
I guess it's been a pretty big week. And do you want to just dive in and tell us, give us a summary of the story here with regard to Pipdig and the background on the blog post that were posted last week and what's happened since then?
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a roller coaster over the last few days. So there is a UK-based company that produces WordPress and Blogger themes. Their name is Pipdig, and they came on our radar last week when we were informed about some sketchy behavior that was present in their P3 plugin. P3 stands for Pipdig Power Pack. And it's the helper plugin that all of their themes lean on. So if you've got one of their themes, they want you to install that plugin so it can do some of the extra stuff that it likes to do. What had been revealed is that in addition to all of the social media helper functions and stuff, it was also featuring some interesting backdoor code that would allow them to change user passwords on affected sites, as well as a database deletion feature and some other code that has been attributed and allegedly is being used for DDoS attacks against competitors.
Interesting. And so let's just unpack this a little bit because I don't know that everyone read the blog post that we put out towards the end of this week, or I should say last week. And so in the first case, they have had the ability until they made a change very recently, and I guess they made the change right after we published this, but they had the ability to reset your admin account's password, right?
Yes. So one of the features in this was once an hour, your site would make a phone home call to their server. And if your email address was returned from their server, your password would be reset to a hard-coded string that was in the plugin itself.
Okay, so that string was hard-coded, and was it obfuscated? Did you have to reverse engineer it a little bit to find out what the password actually was, or was it plain text?
The password was plain text, but there was some obfuscation in the actual password reset function itself. So instead of being named, reset password or something intuitive like that, it was actually named P3 check social links. Okay. So it was implying that some social media functions were taking place in here, and it was called as part of this hourly cron. But it had nothing to do with social media links. It was only a password reset and nothing more. And then after we had notified Pipdig that we had some concerns, it very quickly was hushed away from the code base, and they have yet to acknowledge it since.
Okay, and to be clear, by hushed away, you mean they put out a new release that removed this code, or?
Yes, yeah. So their new release pulled the code out. Interestingly, the very first instance of P3 version 4.8.0 still included the password reset function as an orphaned function. So it wasn't called anywhere anymore, but it still existed. And then when we had our post out and notified everybody of that, another, I call it 4.8.0 second edition, was released, which actually pulled that orphan code out as well. But when I say that they had kind of secreted it away, they haven't acknowledged it. None of the change logs over any of this have acknowledged any of the unusual behavior at all. And it's really just like they're trying to pretend it never existed and never happened, despite mountains of evidence.
And we'll certainly dive into the controversy around this, but so I want to just be clear. So like they could reset your admin password to a password that was hard-coded into the plugin, and that password was plain text.
Yes. Yep. And it was the same for every user.
And if you knew that there's this back door, you could go in and see what password they would reset your password to. And I guess you and I chatted earlier about this, but if you monitored a file on their servers, you would know which sites have had their password reset. Is that right?
Yes. So because of that hourly cron, what it's doing is it's asking Pipdig's server for this text file. If the text file is empty, which it has been in our testing so far, nothing happens and it just continues on. But if an email address is in that file, and that email address is associated with an account on your site, then that new password is associated with it. So if they've got your admin password, which there's a decent chance that the password that if they have your admin email address, there's a decent chance that you gave it to them because you bought the plugin or the theme from them. And so they've got the access there. And because it's a text file on that public server, if somebody was monitoring that file for contents and they see an email address in there, well, now they know there is a WordPress site out there with that email address and this password that I already know is a known value.
Okay, so all they have to do is just figure out which which WordPress website belongs to that email address, and then they can sign in using that email address and that password.
Yep, yeah, just a little bit more OSINT, and there it is.
Okay, okay. Interesting. So not only did they give themselves a backdoor, but it's kind of it's an insecure backdoor because others could potentially abuse their backdoor, right?
Yes, yeah, it's very unusual the way that it was done, where it's making this hourly call outward from the site itself. If this were something where Pipdig had added a special one-time use system where a trusted server of theirs could generate a string that could set up some kind of authentication, and then they notified users of it and acknowledged it publicly, this would be a much different conversation, but it's not, and they haven't, and here we are.
Mikey, as we monitored, as soon as this came to light, were we monitoring that file, and did we ever see any email addresses populated there?
We weren't really doing any real-time monitoring on it. At the time, we were trying to give Pipdig the benefit of the doubt. So anything as far as, just hammering their server with every minute request for this file or anything like that, we weren't in a position to really want to do that at the time.
Great, okay.
And but in cursory checks here and there over the course of the investigation, it was empty every time.
Okay. So I guess there's another thing going on here, and that is the unauthenticated database deletion feature, and where they, the thing that really stood out for me is this loop, which is a for each loop in their code, where it's basically for each tables as table, drop table. It loops through a list of tables and nukes those tables. Mikey, can you talk a little bit about how that works and what it is?
Sure. So the function is in a cron. It's an hourly WordPress cron that runs, and it phones home to Pipdig servers, same as the password reset feature. If the text file that it's querying contains your site URL, your database will be deleted by the plugin immediately.
Wow. So just to clarify, this is basically, if you run their code, there's something in their code that is constantly contacting their servers saying, should I nuke the site?
Once an hour.
How about now?
Yep.
How about now?
Yeah.
How about now?
Yep.
And it's once an hour?
Yep. Yep.
Oh my goodness. And if it gets, you said if your site URL is listed, then it nukes the site, right?
Correct, yeah, and it's the way it's coded, it has to be the only text in that file. It has to be your site URL. So they can only nuke one site at a time, which is unusual, but it doesn't mean it's not there, and it definitely works.
Okay, and if your site is in that list, does it just delete all tables by default?
Yes, well, anything with your site's prefix. So it does look for your database prefix, so it'll only destroy one WordPress site in the event that there's multiple in the same database. But yes, every table, whether it's core or for a plugin, anything matching your prefix is gone.
Okay, and so to be clear, this for a regular WordPress site, if your URL is listed in their file, all of your tables will be deleted, period, right?
Yes.
Wow. That is nuts. And what was the motivation behind this?
Well, so we've heard a couple of different motivations. In an email response to me before our posting was live, Phil from Pipdig said that this was an anti-piracy feature. They said that back in 2018, there had been some theft of license keys and some of their theme code, and so that they had bundled this into the P3 plugin to, I guess, get back at people that had pirated their themes. But he then said that this had never actually been used, and they removed it in 4.8.0 after our conversation. The other explanation that we've gotten was in Pipdig's official response the next day. And in that response, the answer was, oh, this is a factory reset feature for when our users would like to restart from scratch with their database. And we only ever use it with permission.
Kathy, what do you think?
If that's a factory reset, that's kind of like taking your car engine out. That's not a factory reset, in my opinion. Mikey, do we have any evidence that, or any allegations from anybody who has used any of these themes and this P3 plugin that this has ever been used?
We have allegations. Yeah, we have allegations. So the individual who gave us an anonymous tip about this in the first place had mentioned that one of their clients had this issue. And then there was a Twitter user that had mentioned that their database had just vanished and they used P3, and that's the only explanation they had. But these are unconfirmed reports. We haven't really put a lot of weight towards them. Just there's plenty of other evidence in this story that we don't need to lean on this kind of speculation. So there have been allegations, but they haven't really factored into my investigation.
Do you have any, I mean, in your professional opinion, do you have any, I can't think of any reason why this code would need to exist in a theme or plugin file. It just makes no sense to me. I've never seen anything like this in a WordPress install.
I mean, I've seen a lot of code like this, but my job is to look at malware. So,
true.
But as far as a legitimate purpose to go through and just evaporate every table without permission and without any notification or confirmation, that's a big question for me.
Mikey, you didn't just accuse these folks of writing malware, did you?
No, but you know, a favorite saying of mine is, when you hear hoofbeats, don't just assume it's a zebra. And that kind of spurred on this investigation in the first place. I mean, if you were in some of the Slack conversations that we had during the very beginning of the investigation, there was a lot of back and forth, and who wanted to give them some slack and who wanted to decide, you know, oh, well, maybe, you know, we don't know. We can just sort of try to give them some benefit of the doubt. But every new line I encountered that was telling me it did something different than it really did, it just flipping all those little malware sensors in my brain, and it was hard to try to be impartial during this.
Wow. So, you know, speaking about pieces of code that you encountered, so I guess there's more to this, and one of them is this unusual scheduled remote calls where they're making calls to a particular URL, and I guess there's been some speculation that that might be some kind of DDoS. What's going on there?
Yes, so the strong opinion of a lot of users in Twitter has been that this is a DDoS script, but again, without any acknowledgement from Pipdig that makes any sense, it's hard to know. So this is code that is running once an hour, and it's phoning home to Pipdig's server and saying, give me a text file, and this text file contains a URL. And then whatever URL is provided by that text file is then used to send a new request. So we're phoning home to Pipdig, asking for a URL, and then making a request to that URL. The request that is being sent has a spoofed user agent. In the examples that we had seen when we found the text file, they were pointing to a competitor's website, and they were hitting the WP admin ajax.php script, which there should be no use, there should be no purpose to send an empty, meaningless request to somebody else's admin ajax.php script, especially not one with a spoofed user agent claiming to be Google Chrome on Windows 10.
So you mentioned that this is hitting a competitor's URL. How do we know that that's a competitor?
So we've been asked by this competitor to try to keep their name out of things. They've had nothing to do with this whole Pipdig scenario and would really like to be left alone about it. But this is another individual who is in the fashion blogger theme space. And there's been a lot of crossover in terms of when you would come across both names. You know, if you search one name and come across blogs saying where to find good fashion blogger themes, they're often in the same breath, Pipdig and this competitor of theirs. And the URLs were only on our radar when we found them in files on Pipdig servers being used to direct these unusual requests.
Yeah, interesting. So there's some other stuff going on here as well. I guess they're doing some kind of content rewrites on sites in addition to everything else that we've discussed.
Yeah, so it almost feels like it has to be fictional, the amount of new things that are coming up. But yeah, so if you mention the service Bloggerize on your WordPress site in any of your posts, they just add a filter to the underscore content in your theme. So that when any of this single page content loads, it's doing just a flat string replace. So the string Bloggerize gets changed to Blogger to WordPress, and then the URL for Bloggerize is rewritten to one of Pipdig's URLs offering one of their services.
And
so it's
go ahead, Kathy.
It's writing. So the front end of the site would be displaying what Pipdig's plugin is actually swapping out. It's not changing the content in the database, it's just showing it to the front end?
Exactly, yeah. So you're looking at your text editor in your back end of WordPress, and you're typing Bloggerize, and you're seeing Bloggerize in front of you in your editor, and then you go and load it up in your theme, and you're talking about Pipdig.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you don't look at the final rendered version of your code, you'll have no idea that this is happening.
Yes, exactly. And none of this is done with any amount of notification to the user anyway, so it's all a mystery to all of their users until it got brought up.
Okay. And what is Bloggerize?
Bloggerize, I can't tell if it's defunct or not. There hasn't been a lot of activity from them on social or on their website at all, but they are claiming to be a sort of a get started guide for getting into blogging. It's a class that you can take.
Okay, so we're reasonably sure that Pipdig and Bloggerize aren't the same entity. This is something totally different, and Pipdig have taken it upon themselves to simply replace that brand with their own essentially ad in your content, right?
Yeah, so in their response to questions about this, they've pulled the anti-piracy card again, saying, you know, somebody stole our themes and we're just putting our name back where it belongs in the footer. But firstly, the underscore content has nothing to do with the footer content. And secondly, if this was an actual legitimate relationship that they had, why wouldn't they have just said that in the response?
Okay, and to be clear, you're saying that in the PHP code, the replacing function operates on the underscore content, which is the body content of the site, not the footer.
Correct, yeah. So specifically, it only runs if is single is true. So only on a single only when you're visiting a single page or post, and then when that page or post is rendered, the body contents are rewritten. Okay,
so lots of contradictions in their claims and so on. And then, you know, as if that wasn't enough, there's more. They're disabling plugins, aren't they?
Yeah. So this at this point we were kind of happy to just start writing things down that were happening. So yeah, there's 2 points in the plugins code where plugins are deactivated. At one point, there is a big list of plugins, which we've detailed in our article on this. I don't want to rattle it off because I couldn't. But when Pipdig's P3 plugin is activated, all of these plugins are immediately deactivated with no notification, other than if you happen to be looking at your admin dashboard at an appropriate page to get the "we've deactivated blah plugins" thing. And no examples of why these plugins are being disabled are given. There's another point in the code where it's during admin init. So anytime an admin page is viewed, then another set of plugins is deactivated. These ones have comments on them explaining in a few of the cases why they don't want you using this particular plugin. But because it's hooked into admin init, there is no effective way to actually keep these plugins active. if you actually wanted them. Whereas with the activation hook, you can turn them back on after Pipdig turned them off. And in this case, you can't. In Pipdig's response, they've only ever acknowledged the shorter list that had reasons associated, and we have yet to hear anything about the longer list of plugins.
Okay, and so the list of the following plugins are, this is from our blog, the following plugins are all deactivated when P3 is activated. 10 web Instagram feed, Instagram slider widget, categories images, Mojo Marketplace, Auts Optimize, Heartbeat Control, Instagram slider widget, VAF Press, Advanced Excerpt, Force Regenerate Thumbnails, JCH Optimize, Clef, WP Touch, Hello Dolly, ooh, Theme Test Drive. So it's not a short list.
You want a fun fact there that I didn't realize until after the post had gone live? Instagram slider widget is in there twice. And I thought it was a typo at first when somebody called it out to me, but it is in the code twice as well. So when I was in a daze blogging this late at night, and I was just kind of transcribing line by line what was in the code, it just ended up in there twice. So I'm curious why that would have been placed in there twice. I'm also curious what happens if WordPress tries to deactivate the same plugin twice in one call, but I have no idea.
So if I was a fashion blogger in the UK and I wanted to try out this one of Pipdig's themes, and I had some of these plugins installed, and I installed the theme, activated it, and the plugin, the P3 plugin, what would have happened to my site?
So it just depends on what specific combination of these plugins you were using. But ultimately, you've got functionality that you were using, ideally, if it's a plugin that you had active, and now you aren't using it anymore. So depending on the specific plugin, that could be suboptimal.
Well, it could totally change the content and the choices you had previously made about your site, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
But that doesn't matter if they decide to drop your database, Kathy.
It really
Never
doesn't
a stronger
matter.
point has been made.
Yeah, the car's not going anywhere without that engine.
Uh-huh.
I don't care about your Sirius radio.
Right.
Yeah.
So just kind of to recap here. So if you install, well, let me back up a sec. So how does this get installed, Mikey? What actually happens? Do you install a theme of theirs and then it installs this, or do you install a plugin of theirs? What exactly do you have to install for all this stuff to come with it?
So it's a theme that you would purchase. So you buy a theme from them. There's no actual login process to this. You pretty much just give them an email and some payment information, and then they send you a zip. So you install this theme, and then you get a little nag at the top of your admin dashboard saying, this theme needs these plugins, install now. And there's some varying plugins depending on the theme, but all of them say you need P3. And the only way to get that is by clicking this Install Now button, which will fetch it from their server, unpack it, install it, and activate it in one click.
Okay. And to be clear, the themes are premium themes, so they're not in the WordPress.org repository, right?
Yes, yeah. All the themes on their site are paid. They're between, I guess the money doesn't matter, but you pay for these themes. Pipdig does offer some plugins on the .org repository. I haven't really gotten into looking at those at all. I've had some bigger things to deal with here. But yeah, these are all off repository commercial themes, and then the plugin itself that hooks into them.
Okay. And to recap, you install their premium theme, it tells you to install the P3 plugin. You install the P3 plugin. With that comes an unauthenticated password reset, which they have the ability to do. They also gain the ability to delete your database. They also gain the ability to send HTTP requests to any URL that they designate. And there's speculation that that might be some kind of DDoS functionality. Yeah. And they also will automatically change your content. So any mention of Bloggerize switches to, what does it switch to again?
It switches to Blogger to WordPress, which is, I guess, a keyword that they use in one of their migration services.
Is there a link included in that, or is it just text, Blogger to WordPress?
So there's two replaces. One of them is text to text, and one of them is link to link.
Okay, so if there's a link where the link text is Bloggerize, it switches that to Blogger to WordPress, and does it changes the URL as well, I guess?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and then it also will disable a large list of plugins, and wow, that's pretty awesome access that they're giving themselves there. Mikey, I guess there's been some politicking about this online in the Twitter sphere, and I guess in the interaction with these folks. Can you give us some background, kind of what the timeline is and what's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the controversy here, well, in effect, most of it is coming from Pipdig's responses about why some of these decisions were made and when they were done. And what we're coming up against is a lot of evidence saying that, no, this is not the case. So in Pipdig's response regarding the database deletion, for example, one of the answers was this is an anti-piracy feature. This was added in 2018 in response to somebody stealing a bunch of license keys. It's never been used, blah, blah, blah. But with access to the Git repository for this plugin, we actually have evidence of nearly identical code existing in this plugin since 2017.
Okay, so the timeline here is that in, and I'm looking at your notes that you posted earlier, but in November 7th of 2017, the first instance of the database drop code appeared, but they're saying they added it in 2018, and they're saying they added it as an anti-piracy measure, so there's an inconsistency there, yeah?
Yes, so the code has appeared and then vanished and then appeared again. The iteration that you would consider the modern DDoS code popped in September of 2018, but there has been database nuke functionality since 2017.
Okay. All right. Any other interesting inconsistencies or things that you found?
Well, as far as like inconsistencies go with the dates, but that's just because that's the only date that Pipdig has really provided us. But the rest of it is basically, we were notified of this on, well, last Wednesday when this will be airing. And then Thursday, we dove in and started really getting our feet wet with this. This is when I reached out to Phil from Pipdig originally, when I had gotten my response from that. And the timeline of when some of these changes were made is very striking. So 4.7.3 was the most recent version as of the beginning of this investigation. After we notified Phil that we had some concerns and would like some explanations, 4.8.0 was very quickly ushered out with the majority of the offending code removed. Then a little bit later, another version of 4.8.0 came out with even more of the offending code removed and no acknowledgement in any change logs that any of this had happened. And it's just sort of been this recurring tale of the internet is telling the rest of the internet about a thing Pipdig did, and then they try to throw a blanket over it, and then we point out that we still have access to the bottom of the blanket.
Do we have any idea of the install base for their plugin, or well, the plugin and their themes? Like, what's the user base? Do we have an idea?
I don't have a hard figure there. With some cursory looks through services like public.www.com, we've arrived at a round total between 10 and 15,000 using the P3 plugin. I don't know how many of their users may be on Blogger that doesn't have that sort of plugin. But yeah, definitely in the 5-figure range.
How are their users responding to this research?
That's been a lot of fun for me. Response on Twitter has been sort of divided, where we've got a bunch of our usual followers who are active in WordPress. A lot of them are developers themselves. They know kind of what they're looking at, if not definitely what they're looking at. And all of these users out there pointing at things that we're saying and that other people are saying and saying, no, this is definitely true, this is happening. But then we, in this other camp, have Pipdig's user base, who are largely non-technical. The people coming forward have almost uniformly been things like fashion bloggers and parenting bloggers and lifestyle bloggers, where the actual guts of what's running on this thing is the last thought on their mind. And that's okay, but they're saying, I don't know a lot about code, so I'm just going to trust Pipdig. And a lot of these people are using the first names of the people that work at Pipdig, saying that, no, we've had a relationship with Phil for 5 years, there's no way. And there's just been this kind of resistance to and believing that this, proven fact is even possible.
Are there other security researchers that are corroborating what we found?
Yeah, this was really interesting, actually. So Jem had been going through an almost identical investigation at the same time as us. We got our article out just about 2.5 hours before she did, but the content was almost the same. We skewed a little bit more cautious in making some of the larger, broader accusations, whereas Jem was pretty happy to throw the word DDoS out right away, which is understandable given what was in there, but we kind of operate from a position of, we don't want to start something that isn't demonstrably true. But the fact that there is an independent researcher who was, notified and has been investigating this similarly to us, and everything came out all at once, it's caused a bit of a stir.
Interesting. And she started looking at this plugin because of one of her customers. That she's a developer, correct? And she had a customer that came to her saying something's not right with my site.
Yeah, that's what I've understood. And
okay.
So yeah, she was similarly tipped off, and just the investigation started from there.
And Mikey, I guess it was a really strange coincidence that, but we released our research around the same time. I think we probably got in an hour or two ahead of her, but it was really pretty close, right?
Yeah, it was about 2.5 hours. It was here on the West Coast. It was about 9:40 when we published, and then it was in the early noon hour when she did.
So, Mikey, there's so many dimensions to the story. I guess there's the technical aspect of it, where this developer has given themselves extraordinary access to the sites that run their code. There's this sort of social media aspect where there's a lot of conversation on Twitter and Hacker News and Reddit and so on about this. And then there's kind of the response from this developer. I guess one of the things we noticed is that they took down their Bitbucket repo where the code was being stored.
Yeah, and it was a very quick response. So Jem Jabella, again, was the one that discovered it. This was actually today, as of recording, Sunday, where she had found an open Git repository on Bitbucket where the full commit history of this plugin could be found. That got shared around a little bit. We got ourselves a Git clone of that repository, so we have a nice authoritative history of everything that happened there. I have a dog coming. Why did this dog come here? Sorry about that.
It's fine. Keep going. I'm not going to cut this out. It's hilarious.
I don't know if the dog even got in the shot.
That's fine.
But
and to be clear, the reason we know that the drop database code was put in there in was it the drop database code that was put in there in 2017?
Yes. Yeah, and we found that in this Git repository.
Right.
Very shortly after it became public knowledge, it just very suddenly was gone. Thankfully, we had made our own archivals of everything, and we still have all the evidence we need to complete an investigation. But it's a weird look if they're just kind of trying to make this go away.
Yeah, and to be clear, for folks that are not developers, what a what a code repository is it keeps every version of the code that's ever existed and a version history and notes on why certain changes were made. And so by having access to the Bitbucket repo, we could see when certain code was added. And as we've pointed out earlier in the conversation, there's inconsistencies in terms of when they're claiming code was added and when it was actually added. The Bitbucket repo makes it very clear what those inconsistencies are. But they took down that repo as soon as this controversy broke. We've managed to mirror that repo into a different platform, and that has allowed us to maintain the version history of the code and to reveal some of the data and the timeline that we've been discussing here. So I think you also mentioned that what's a little weird is that they've kind of refuted a lot of the claims in various ways, and there's no sort of conclusive refutation from them. But one of the things that they just simply haven't acknowledged is the password reset code, right?
Yeah, nowhere have they acknowledged this is possible. They're even going so far as saying in their updated responses, they're going, oh, everybody knows that we have to ask them for passwords if we want to give them support. We would love to be able to log in without permission and all of this stuff. And we can point at the code and go, why would you have written an obfuscated function that changes a password and name it check social links? And they've just sort of tried to say that it's not true and it's not ever happened, despite literal evidence to the contrary.
Okay, and to be clear, I mean, Kathy, wouldn't, for support from our side, for our product, wouldn't you love the ability to log in as admin? You know, assuming there's no ethical issue with this at all, and for some reason you're allowed to do this, wouldn't it be unbelievably convenient if we gave ourselves the ability to log in as admin on any of our customer sites?
It would be easier to answer questions like what version of PHP are you running, or what version of MySQL is, you know, your database using, those types of things that sometimes end users who don't understand what makes WordPress work. Every developer wants to be able to bypass some of those hard questions. How are you doing it, though?
Yeah.
And
well, let me try a different analogy on you here. So what if Microsoft, to provide better customer support, gave themselves the ability to sign in into any Windows installation without that customer's permission?
Oh, they don't already? That was a joke.
As I was saying
Just
that, I actually realized I don't know if they do or don't.
That was just a joke. But yeah, there's geez, you know, I one of the talks that I give at WordCamps is evaluating plugins, and how when you install something on your site, you're basically entering into a relationship with the developer. You have to have a certain level of trust because it's your site. You're responsible for what happens on your site, and yet you're taking someone else's code and you're placing it on your site and activating it, and that is the code that's running. So, I mean, same thing with your laptop computer. There's an interesting dynamic between end users and developers, isn't there?
For sure, for sure. Now, I guess there's another thing going on here, and that is in the conversations that are happening online and in the sort of blog posts that these guys, that Pipdig are posting, they're going after Gem, but they're not going after us at all, are they, Mikey?
No, they have yet to publicly acknowledge that we even exist, despite everybody on Twitter going, hey, do you have anything to say about this specific post or any of these tweets about it? Just complete radio silence, and it is deafening. I mean, it's not that I really care that much that Gem is getting the attention on this necessarily, but we are a company that is built on a reputation for ethics and taking this kind of thing seriously. And I think that even Pipdig knows to try and claim directly that Wordfence is up to some ungood business, they know that they would get laughed out of the room for that. Whereas some blogger, as far as they're concerned, they can smear them left and right. But the reality of it is everybody can hear what they're not saying.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Everyone can hear what they're not saying. I love that. And I guess they're alleging that there's some bias or something because there's backlinks going to a competitor from Jem's post or something like that.
Yeah, and I ended up having to walk back from that a little bit too. Pipdig wasn't making these accusations, but some of their fans were, because we had for a moment included a link to this competitor's site, that there must be some collusion there. And I think looking at it, the source of this is these are bloggers. Blogging is what they know. And to a blogger, a link is currency. Whereas to me, a link is just evidence, and it's a completely different conversation. And so when the controversy comes up of, well, what do they have to gain for telling you all of this shady stuff that we totally didn't do? That's something that this blogosphere community is really picking up on is, oh, there was a link, there is some financial incentive here. But no, I mean, we pulled it for the benefit of this competitor, because again, they don't want any attention because of this. But it was a weird accusation for me until I made that realization. And sorry, I guess, but we included it to be thorough, not to give them any traffic.
Yeah, and I think Jem did too. You know, she included the backlink because it's relevant, but it's a, you know, it feels like they're grasping at straws, saying, well, here's some way that I can discredit this research, and specifically Jem's research. Again, they haven't tried to come after us at all, and they're also making legal threats against Jem, saying that she's, you know, tarnished their good name or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I didn't really pay enough mind to that to really gratify it anywhere. I mean, there's the old saying, the first thing you do when building a legal case is tell everybody that you're building a legal case. But it's just kind of weird and out of place. And I'm sure it was just kind of hot air going nowhere, just as another way of saying, no, we totally didn't do this. It's all false. And our lawyers are hearing about this. But it's not false. There's evidence, and that's it.
Yeah. You know, to be honest, I would love for this to go to court, not with them versus Jem, because, you know, she's just my understanding is that she's just an individual blogger. But if they came after us, you know, our research is incredibly well documented with source code samples, snippets in the blog post. Of course, we've got a mirror of their source code repository and showing every, you know, the history of every version that they've ever released, even though they try to take that offline and so on. And so, you know, these aren't allegations. This is just provable fact. And if it did happen to go to court, wouldn't that be fun?
I would follow that directly. And I don't really love legal battles or anything like that, but I do just have this amazing sense of watching people sort of eat their own words. And, you know, especially when somebody's calling into question research done by people who take pride in ethics and from crossing T's and dotting I's. It's just kind of, it's been a roller coaster, but it's one that will almost surely crash.
So, Kathy, you know, you've been following the story pretty closely. I mean, what do you think if you were the developer here and you were kind of caught doing this? How would you handle it? What do you think the appropriate way to handle this is?
You know, if I was the developer, well, this would have never happened on my watch. I'll tell you that much. But in dealing with a PR disaster like this, I think coming clean and just saying, yes, it was there, and saying they're sorry, and just kind of moving on from that and trying to do the right thing. And I've been really impressed with our team and how we've handled it. I mean, it was pretty obvious, I think, when this code sample came in and we started analyzing it. We did so much due diligence. We did not go to press without knowing exactly what we were talking about. And reaching out to them, you know, Mikey, you sent them an email and asked about what we were seeing, didn't you? I mean, right before we ever said anything publicly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I emailed them. I got a response very quickly from Phil, which was a testament to all of these things people are saying about their responsiveness with customer service, I guess. But once I had asked the security questions, I got a response, but it was sort of wishy-washy.
Yeah.
He didn't answer many of my specific questions, and then the ones that he did answer, I mean, like the database deletion code, the answer given was questionably canonical, let's say.
Yeah, so I guess from my side, and Kathy, I'm definitely in your camp. We would certainly never even come close to implementing code like this. No matter how convenient it is when it comes to customer support, being able to sign into people's sites as an admin. But if I think the best way to handle this is to own it, to say, yeah, we messed up, and we understand how we messed up. I guess having a conversation that demonstrates that you understand what you did wrong and kind of how to fix it, and how it's not going to happen again, and perhaps talking about controls that one has put in place to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, demonstrating an understanding of why having an admin backdoor into a site is a problem, of why being able to remotely drop tables on any site is a problem and not a good way to enforce copyright on your code, that kind of thing. I think just basically owning it is the best course of action here. But what seems to have happened is that that's not the approach that they've taken, and I think that's really unfortunate. To be honest, I think there's still time to own it, and just say, hey, okay, we screwed up, and we're going to fix it. And then we're trying to make the online community safer. We work with vendors all the time, small vendors, big vendors, and we work with them confidentially to help make their code more secure. And so, we're certainly open, even after all this, Phil, I'm talking to you, we are actually open to working with you guys, and we'll do it confidentially to help you get your code back in order. So, if you want to do that, reach out to us, and we'll make it happen. Yeah, so interesting story, guys. Any last thoughts before we move on, Kathy?
No, it's just been it's been an amazing story. The one thing that I would want to say, well, a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of non-technical people who use these themes and this plugin. If you're not technical, there is a huge community of WordPress highly technical people and less technical people, and people who understand technical things that can explain them to a beginner. And Mikey, I saw you on Twitter talking to a lot of people who were not technical, who had, valid questions, and you answered them and filled them in, and no matter how basic the question was. The thing that makes WordPress work is not the code base. Well, the code base is obviously important, but there's a community of people who are dedicated to making WordPress what it is. And that community comes together to look for things like this, to analyze code, to corroborate things, to question things. And yes, you can plug anything into WordPress, whether it's a plugin or a theme, no matter who developed it. But this community that exists around the ecosystem of WordPress is incredibly valuable. So for anybody who's like, I don't know who these people are or who's ganging up on Pipdig, look at the community. The community is there to support you and help you answer these hard questions and make technology accessible to you. So leverage that.
Agreed.
I definitely agree. I think Pipdig's users would have an easier time learning about WordCamps if they didn't hide the meta box that told you about them from their admin dashboard.
What the heck is that? What is the purpose of that?
They responded to that one. They said, oh, we just do it to make your dashboard a little bit faster. But it's just one of another 100,000 weird decisions that would be okay without such a weird, wishy-washy answer. And were it not standing next to a bunch of other examples of them trying to cut off other sources of support and things like that. It's just weird, and I'm not a fan of how any of it has been going. All I've really wanted is for somebody to say, again, yeah, sorry, that was me. My bad, but it's not happened. I don't know if it's coming. I hope it does, but here we are.
Okay. Well, Mikey, thank you very much for your analysis and the blog post and for joining us on the podcast. It's been a really great conversation. I'll just reiterate what Kathy said. That there's a community out there. If you are not super technical but you use WordPress, definitely reach out to the community. We're part of the community. We're happy to help. We're active on Twitter and the forums and so on. And yeah, interesting story. We'll certainly keep following it. Thank you very much, Mikey. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Have a good one.
You too. All right, Kathy, should we dive into the news?
I guess so. Yeah, it's time.
We've got a interesting story here about a challenge that is kind of what we would call an opsec fail for folks. Do you want to explain what the story is there?
Sure. Okay, so there's been this meme that has been going on for a long time about Florida man. It stems from the way Florida criminal charges are reported to the news. So there's all of these stories. Florida man rustles alligator. Florida man orders Taco Bell and does something strange at Taco Bell. So there was this thing that happened last week where somebody posted and it kind of went viral. Go to Google and Google your birth date and Florida man. And so people started posting their birth dates on social media along with, the funny Florida man story for the day. So this kind of went viral. But the thing I think people don't really think about is, yeah, it's fun in the moment and it appeals to your vanity and community, but that becomes your permanent record, right? It's on your Twitter, it's on your Facebook forever. And if somebody was researching you, they could find out that information, couldn't they, Mark?
Yeah, exactly. And in the industry, I mentioned earlier, but this is what we call an opsec fail or operational security fail or problem. Where you are revealing information about yourself that an attacker can access, and they can then use that to do bad things. And so in the case of this challenge, you're revealing your birthday, but there's other challenges on Twitter that go into much more detail and ask you to reveal much more information. So, the street you were born on, your mother's maiden name, your birthday, and those kinds of things. They'll ask you to combine all of that data into something or other, and then, oh, look, this is your actor name or whatever it is. But the data that you're revealing can be used to gain access to accounts through password reminders. They can be used to guess your password. They can be used in other ways to authenticate to banks or other service providers. They might ask you questions like that for authentication. And so this really is an operational security problem. And, I'm using the word OPSEC, which is kind of formal speak in information security circles. But, as we mature as an online society, terms like OPSEC or operational security are going to become familiar to individuals as they learn how to protect their own security or their own cybersecurity and improve their security posture. And so I think this is a story that's worth, we tagged it as security. Obviously this podcast is about WordPress security and innovation. And we thought that we wanted to just share this with our listeners and our viewers because it is something that you don't want to do. And if you can avoid doing this, it's really going to help improve your personal OPSEC, right, Kathy?
Definitely. And what was the first concert that you went to, Mark?
The first concert I went to?
That's a trick question. I'm trying to trick you.
I'll tell you the first CD that I ever bought. It was Roxette. I think it was called Look Smart. And I just wanted to buy a CD. And this was in South Africa where we didn't have a whole massive selection of CDs. And so that was the first one my explanation is that's the first one I laid my hands on. But I actually happened to like that particular CD by Roxette. So OPSEC fail from my side.
I'll make a note of it in case your bank uses that as a secret question.
There you go. All right. Good deal. All right, moving on to the next story. So we had an interesting conversation on Twitter that we wanted to cover. And, we're not really taking a position on this, but there was an interesting thing that I think Mehul Gohil, Mehul, I apologize if I'm butchering your name. He tweeted a screenshot for how Jetpack is inserting a nag into search results to use their CDN. So when you're in the WordPress interface and you're looking for a plugin, you'll do a search for whatever. And Jetpack, if you have that plugin installed, it's inserting a kind of like an ad, right, Kathy, for one of their products?
Yeah, basically this, and it kind of comes up with search results. And this was just sort of encouraging people to try Jetpack's CDN. And it had an interesting little bar around it, but it was coming up in search results. So that was kind of an interesting thing that I haven't seen this actually show up yet, but Mihail did share a screen capture of what he was seeing. And a number of people on Twitter were asking some questions, whether or not this had any violation of plugin repository rules. I think Matt Cromwell had asked that question, and also asked what happens if every plugin did something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then Mehul, when he looked into the source code, he confirmed that it came from Jetpack. And to be clear, the result appears like a search result along with a list of other plugins that came up. It's obviously been injected in there by the Jetpack plugin, but it does have an option to remove that. I think there's a link at the bottom that says, click here if you don't want to see this, or was it click here if you don't want to, if you want to find out where it came from. Let me go back to that tweet and take a look.
Yeah, it said something like hide the suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. It was hide this suggestion. And that appears in the results. So they do give you the option to hide it. And yeah, so, on the one hand, I mean, we've had this conversation over and over, right? Where you'll see, so Jetpack, just for some background, is a plugin that's made by Automatic. Automatic is, I think Matt Mullenweg is the founder of Automatic, and I'm not sure if Matt's still the CEO, but he basically runs the company in one form or another. And Automatic have raised VC money, and they have various business models, but that's Matt's company, and so Automatic have caught heat for I don't know, benefiting from WordPress in ways that seem unfair to some people, and Matt as well. So for example, in the footer of WordPress.org, you've got a link to WordPress.com, which is Automatic's commercial hosting service, and you've got a link to Matt's blog. I don't know, I mean, on the one hand, I don't, you could sort of go around and try to police, well, who's benefiting from WordPress, and is that fair, and should there be some kind of process to figure out what goes where in terms of marketing? And on the other hand, it feels it's a little bit like a messy meritocracy, where obviously Matt has made a massive contribution to WordPress as pretty much its founder, and Automatic dedicate a huge amount of dev resources to WordPress.org, as well as various other things WordPress that the .org community benefit from. And so, I'm feeling okay about Matt's blog being in the bottom of the footer for WordPress.org, as well as WordPress.com being linked to there. So, I guess it's really up to you, how you feel about this. And I think it was an interesting conversation. So, you can definitely check that out on Twitter. We'll include it in the show notes. Yeah, feel free to express an opinion. Tweet us on what you think, and if it gets interesting, we'll cover it in next week's podcast. But yeah, moving on to the next story here. So this, in my notes that I'm looking at as I do the podcast, the beginning text of the story is, this is kind of controversial. so this is going to be an interesting one. Kathy, do you want to run with this one? What's going on here?
Sure. Okay. So there is a writer who has written for a number of publications, but has kind of made a name for herself. Her online name is VioletBlue. She has garnered quite a large following online, but she writes about sex. So she's written about sexual freedom, and it's not just, dirty material or whatever, but she has written about sex freedom, the politics of sexuality. She has appeared on Oprah to talk about women and pornography, and she funds herself through, she's part of the way that she's funded herself was through Amazon Associates. She's been a part of Amazon Associates since 2002, and I came across somebody who had retweeted her statement that they have removed her from Amazon Associates. Over the years, she's had problems funding herself, and has been removed from services like PayPal, Square, MailChimp, Google, Facebook ads, most web hosts, and Apple and Google Play. So this kind of feels like a bit of deplatforming, where you have a writer who's generating content that enough people find valuable that she's making, you know, Amazon associate funds and maybe referral ads and things like that, enough, you know, of an audience in the content that she's generating in order to support herself. And these corporate companies are deciding that they no longer want to be associated with her. So, Mark, I'm sure you have some opinions about what's happened here.
Well, I suspect what's happened is that they've bundled her up into kind of a cohort of folks that cover a particular subject matter, and they've said, okay, we'll algorithmically kick them off our platform. And, you know, there might be some human intervention, but looking at the list of services she's been kicked off from, you know, it's Amazon, PayPal, MailChimp, Google, and so on. And these are companies, and Apple Pay, Apple Play. Is that Google Play that?
Yeah, I think it's
well?
Apple,
Okay.
Apple and Google Play.
Yeah. So these are companies that rely heavily on algorithms because they're operating at massive scale. And so what they'll do is they'll algorithmically identify, you know, undesirables that should not be on their platform, and then they'll take them through a process where they get kicked off. And I think that what might have happened is that she's been bundled up into this, and it's kind of interesting. You know, Kathy, you used the term deplatforming, and there was this interesting story about a week ago where there was this very, very tragic shooting in New Zealand where a gunman went into 2 mosques and shot 50 people, killed 50 people. And, you know, unless you've been on the moon, you've obviously heard about this. But the gunman was on 8chan, which is a website, right before he went in and did this terrible thing. And Cloudflare protects 8chan from DDoS attacks. And so there was a lot of debate on Twitter saying, well, Cloudflare should essentially deplatform or make their services unavailable to 8chan because they're protecting a bad website, because this website has bad people hanging out on it. And, you know, Cloudflare, I don't know actually what's happened since then, but at the time Cloudflare said that they're not going to remove 8chan because of free speech and so on. And that's been their position on a lot of things. I think they said they generally follow US law. But that I would say is an example of deplatforming. You know, other examples are if you are saying things that are very undesirable, or even undesirable to a certain group of people, but maybe not another group. You might be on a hosting provider where a group that doesn't like you will put pressure on that hosting provider to deplatform you, to remove your capability to disseminate your message. And I think in some cases, you know, this is a debate, right? You've got to figure out where you land on this, because do you want deplatforming to happen through activism, or do you want it to happen through the legal system? And you know, so do we work to create laws that define who should get deplatformed and who shouldn't, or do we do it through activism? You know, that's your call. I'm not going to take a position on that today, but this is just an interesting case because, you know, with all this conversation about deplatforming, you've got VioletBlue, who writes, who is a legitimate writer, and you know, she's been, as Kathy said, on Oprah. She was also on Google Tech Talk, you know, covering her subject matter, and but I think that she's been caught up in something which is really unfortunate, because what it's done is it's affected a legitimate author who's really contributing, you know, knowledge and insight to society, and basically put her in a situation where she can no longer make a living, or it's become very difficult for her to make a living. And I guess for us, this ties back into WordPress.org, which is a platform that you control. You know, it's your software. You put it on your own server. You don't even have to get a hosting provider. You can run your own server if you like. But it gives you a little bit more freedom, and perhaps helps you avoid being deplatformed. And you know, that's something that we've covered a fair amount. But again, you know, even with WordPress, you're relying on payment processors. You know, I'm looking at the list here with PayPal and Apple.
Even Coinbase kicked her off this.
Right.
So she couldn't even do the cryptocurrency thing to earn funds. But I mean, this kind of thing has happened. Do you remember Metafilter was one of the first blogging it was kind of a group blog, and it still exists, but the revenue stream was very dependent upon Google AdSense, and Google kind of changed the way that the algorithms had changed, and their funding kind of dried up because they were so dependent upon one way of getting paid. So it kind of just harkens back to that same kind of conversation we had in a previous episode where we talked about Hacker Noon and Medium, that you have to make some decisions about where you're building your business, and what pipes are basically, how's the sewer system going to get hooked up for you, or how is the water going to come into your house, and where's the funding going to come from. And if you're depending on large services like this, you're beholden to their terms of service and their large algorithms that may then someday decide that you don't belong there.
Agreed. Exactly. And I'll tell you what, we weren't going to cover this story, but Kathy, why don't we just cover the EU Article 13 story this week as well, because it really ties into this.
Sure.
So, what we're talking about here is how these economies develop on a particular platform, and how the folks that are making a living on that platform, or businesses, and big businesses in some cases, are reliant on the economy that platform has created remaining consistent and also remaining fair. Right. And
definitely,
the reason I wanted to, at the last minute, literally decide to include the Article 13 story here is because what's happened in the EU is that they've passed a new law. Now, this law is being passed by the EU Parliament. It's been voted into law, and each of the individual member countries now have to vote on it to decide what they want to do. But the law is called the European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market. And there's a few articles in this law that have caught the interest of some folks. And we'll really focus on Article 13 here. But Article 13 of the law states, online content sharing service providers and right holders shall cooperate in good faith in order to ensure that unauthorized protected works or other subject matter are not available on their services. Now, what's interesting about this is that this puts the responsibility or the onus on the platforms for preventing copyrighted material from arriving on their platform in the first place. Some of the conversation around this seems to imply that the law expects them to do it algorithmically. But this is a very, very big change, because in the US, we've had the DMCA, or the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, for a long time now. And the way the DMCA has worked is that if copyright material is uploaded to a platform of some sort, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or whatever, the responsibility is really on the copyright holder to send a DMCA takedown request to that platform, at which point the platform will take that down. And platforms like YouTube have automated ways to do this, to handle those DMCA takedown requests. This law, the European Union Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market law, really changes the game, because it shifts that responsibility back to the platform. And that's a huge change. And so the reason I wanted to really include this in the conversation, kind of segue into this from the VioletBlue story that we covered, is that this law is going to potentially make a fundamental change to the way YouTube, for example, operates. And just to be clear on that, what's going on there is that with YouTube, they actually have a content ID program, and that lets copyright holders identify and either block or monetize content. And so that's kind of become a business model on YouTube, where sure, you use a copyrighted song in a video, the copyright owner has a way to know that you did that, and they can actually monetize your video and make money out of it. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. This massively changes that model, because now the question is, well, can that copyright content be uploaded to YouTube in the first place? Probably not, because the EU is saying that it's on YouTube to prevent that content from being uploaded. And so this is really a tectonic shift that is going to massively affect business models, I think.
Definitely. Do you think, it kind of reminds me, I mean, with the GDPR law that came into effect, and there was all of this, I mean, I know businesses, smaller businesses, that decided they just didn't want to have to deal with it, and they just stopped doing business in Europe. Would these large corporations do something like that?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head. I think balkanization is perhaps the word that we're both looking for here. With these changes, and you know, there's quite a few changes that have happened so far with laws in each country being out of sync, and I think there's a lot more coming. And so I think that what this risks is a balkanization of the internet, where you have each country having its own internet and its own service providers, its own Google, because Google chose to not do business in that country, or its own YouTube or whatever. And so I think that is a potential outcome here.
That kind of goes against the whole spirit of the internet, of connecting people no matter where they are, being able to access the entirety of human knowledge and opinion from wherever they are.
Oh, you're going to get me reminiscing to the days of when the entire internet in South Africa was connected to the rest of the world via a single 9600 baud modem. But it was open, and it was an academic network, and it was wonderful. Everyone was sharing, and friends, and hacking was all about exploring. But I won't go there, even though I just did. So, all right, Kathy, I think we should call it.
Okay.
It's been a great conversation, and have a good one. Thanks for the chat. This week we've got an amazing interview lined up for you. I chatted with Raquel Landefeld at WordCamp Phoenix. She was incredibly busy there because Raquel is very much involved with the WordPress community, but she found the time to talk with me. Raquel is, these days she works at Elegant Themes as an event coordinator. She's actually a co-founder of Mode Effect, which is an awesome agency in Phoenix. And she's involved in a variety of other projects. In our conversation, we chatted about WordPress, the community, and some of the challenges that Raquel has faced being an entrepreneur and a mom. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Here's Raquel.
I am Raquel Landefeld, and I self-title that's very redundant, but I've given myself the title community builder. So wherever I am, job, no job, mom, wife, anything, I build community. My motto is wherever my feet are is where my community building is. So if it's in the office, I'm going to be intentional about it. If it's at my kids' school, I'm going to be intentional. At my church, in my city, I'm going to build community. And by building community, I mean IRL, meeting people, building relationships, building trust, because I feel like that's the way this world goes around. We see a lot of each other on social media, but it's very, 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 very shallow. It's fun, but the real human behavior and connections happen in real life. So you can have really, really good infrastructure, but if you don't have a good community, then you have nothing. And so wherever I go, that is my title. So to me, what building community entails is really developing relationships with others. On a quick first meet level, it might be making eye contact. And I work in a co-working space, and when you pass by people, a lot of times they don't want to look at each other, and so I just kind of stare down with a smile until they meet my eyes, and then just say hi or whatever, or just smile. And then from there, it's, hey, we see each other, let's go grab coffee or happy hour and just get to know each other, get to know each other's businesses, get to know each other's lives, and just leave it at that. When it comes to networking, it's really just getting to know each other. And of course, when it comes to business, the idea is that, relationships built on trust really is where good business happens. So over time, because we get to know each other, maybe we'll use each other's businesses or anything like that. When it comes to my kids' school, it's, our kids are friends, and we should get to know each other. And, the more and more you get to know each other, the more and more you build trust, it saves a lot of drama or unnecessary anythings. And anything negative is probably the best way to put that. And so when I'm intentional about building a relationship with somebody, it doesn't mean we're best friends, but it means there's a rapport, then it just immediately cuts out so much just bad blood that might be in the air. And I'm a little, I guess in a way, I think healthy, defensive about it, because in that sense of I'm going to be proactive to counter it, because I just feel like our world right now is very divided and is very polarizing, and the moderates, and by that I don't mean that necessarily politically, but in all ways, are afraid to come out as that. And so it really helps, because when we have a rapport with each other based on just respect and humanness, then it helps neutralize any other problems. On a personal level, I was a young mom and was doing the mom thing all in my 20s, and was kind of, my identity was diaper changer. And so I was really missing people, and then kind of exiting my 20s roughly, my husband and I started our business, and I started to discover my identity, and that was, one, I'm 100% an extrovert. Like, I'm a true extrovert. My power comes from people, and I love being around people. So for me, personally, the eye contact and the intentional, just let's get to know each other, even if it's just, I know that person's name and we say hi to each other, it helps fulfill my need for people interaction. And so I love that. And I realize over time that if I don't get that, then I start to not be well. I start to have my little emotional struggles. So I really need that personally. But then I noticed from a business standpoint that we love doing business with people we trust. And it's not like I'm trying to get them to trust me so they could get in and now do business with Motifect, but they appreciate that, and then they start to, when we build trust, then they want to do that with other companies. And
were you guys both or founders of Motifect?
It is accurate to say we are both co-founders, yes, of Motifect.
Yeah.
I, through my whole journey of discovery of self, besides being a wife and a mom, which both are contingent on another human, so both can go away. So I was trying to discover who I was, and being such a young mom, I didn't really get a lot of opportunity to, because I was a baby still, I was 20. It's like, who really knows who they are as an adult when they're 20? And so what I was doing for Motifect, I didn't love. And I just finally got to the point, I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I love the company and always will, and it's my baby. So I now am more of an absentee owner and pursue doing events because I love doing events. And I also joke that I'm a serial volunteer, and I'm like, I love anything that I can volunteer for, I love it. And I almost feel like maybe I'm cursed because I'm like, if I get paid, well, all of a sudden I not love it anymore, because being paid would be nice too. But yeah, so co-founders of Motifect, and right now I am really just that with Motifect. Cody, before we started the business, Cody had done websites on the side always, and we, take a drink real quick. At first in our entrepreneur journey, Cody and myself, I did a lot of admin and operations and things like that, and he started getting involved with the community, the WordPress community, and he would go to WordCamps or meetups or whatever. And then eventually I started going with, and I was definitely the wife. But Cody has always been, I don't even know exactly why, but he kind of established from the beginning that, we don't need to be around each other. Let's divide and conquer. You go meet new people and I'll do that, and we'll, represent Motifect multiple places and not just together. And so I quickly discovered my love for this community, a very different community, a community not full of peacockers at the time, like a community that was super humble and just like there's a human, let's get to know you. And it wasn't based on how cool or pretty, you are, which were a lot of the communities I was used to. So I just fell in love with the community, really fell in love, and then just started to volunteer for some of the WordCamps, and not even here locally, but even WordCamps elsewhere in the United States. And then at the time, WordCamp Phoenix had a really big 2014 camp. There was 750. It was next to San Francisco, was the biggest in the world at the time. This was before Europe or anything. And they also had like a burnout type of committee for their organizers, and everybody was out. They weren't going to do it. And so they asked me to do it. I had zero experience with organizing. I'm like, I can't. And basically that kind of put a bug in me, and a seed was planted, and between that time and a year and a half later, myself and a few others figured it out, and we organized, brought WordCamp back to Phoenix in 2016. It was a year and a half in total in span. So,
your work with WordCamps now, can you describe what you've been doing over the last year or so?
Yeah. So with the way WordCamps are structured, you can be a lead organizer 2 years consecutive. You could be an organizer, just not lead. So for the past 2 years, I've been the lead, and before that, I was doing sponsors, ringling sponsors. And so this past year, so my first lead was 2018, and we did an unprecedented thing in that our 2017 WordCamp was in October, our 2018 WordCamp was in February. So there was 4 months, essentially, of planning, and that was insane. It was a whirlwind, but it was amazing. We purposely made it that one small at 350, the 2017 camp, and then 2018 we sold over 500 tickets and did it within that short of a span. And we even were concerned of community exhaustion, of having too much too soon, but it was good. And so that was an interesting lead because it was a very short time. So for this past year, I've had the whole year to really plan this event. And so for me, this event was very special because it was our 10-year anniversary. I actually wasn't at the 2009 camp, but Cody was my business partner and husband. And so just to see this community come all these 10 years was a big deal. I mean, WordCamp Phoenix was one of the first, and especially one of the biggest in the world for when it comes to WordCamps. So I really take a pride in the influence that Phoenix has been, and very much has been an influence to WordCamps as a whole. Not just here, but globally. I remember being in WordCamp Europe in Sevilla, 2015, and hearing word about how they used WordCamp Phoenix as examples of actually what not to do. So it was very comical. And to me, I looked at it like, you know what? I'll take that. I'll take that badge of honor because we're known. I was like, yeah. But anyway, so to me, our 10-year anniversary was very special. And so having the year to plan was good. I seriously thought my team was going to kill me when I presented them with this idea of having a high school reunion, and most of them did love it. So I was very glad because I could be sentimental, but I'm also very left brain at times. So I'm sentimental but not highly emotional, if that makes sense. And so I love a show. I love a show and wanted to give everybody a show. And having this whole year to do that really, really helped make this happen. And I'm glad. I think we pulled it off too. Yeah. I love my kids. They came in fast, they came in strong, and they consumed my life, and I loved it. I was very intentional about it, and was very happy. I had no regrets to nurse them for a year each and to be home with them. I loved it. But very much as they grew up a little bit and I started to have more freedom, especially when school years began, I was like, what do I get to do now? And have been very big on being able to do stuff. And they are now 16, 14, and 12, and I get to do a lot more. But I still very much put them way at the top. And I was actually trying to get them to come to WordCamp this time, but they're like, no. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
So I know this has been discussed a lot in maybe in the news, but women in tech is a very kind of topical thing, and you are a woman in technology. You have 3 kids. You have made quite a name for yourself in the community. You're recognized as being a leader in the WordPress community, and you deliver in terms of organizing WordCamps. You get things done. So I was wondering if you, for a moment, think of yourself as a mentor to other women in tech who either plan to have kids or have kids. Are there any thoughts that you want to share with those folks?
That is hard. There's a little bit of an imposter syndrome when I think of myself as a mentor that way. I think a lot of it is because I am such a doer and I just do things. And I feel over time I've grown and gotten very good at delegating and doing better about not just doing and empowering others to do so. I think that my message to anybody would be, you could do whatever you want to do, absolutely 100%, especially with women. I know that I had kids when I was very young, and I do believe I'm the minority with that in today's climate. Mostly what I see is women have been able to get into their careers, even in the tech industry, and then later have kids. And I struggle with the amount of weight that is, because I was able to segment and do my child rearing years first and then enter, and have felt like I've had a lot of liberty that way to do so. But I know we're doing so many things to enable women to do whatever they want, to have kids. And in some ways, I do feel like a pioneer, like for instance, with breastfeeding. I used to have to go into the dirty bathroom to pump when I worked at Starbucks. Like, this was like 2000s, early 2000s, and that sucked. And they made me clock out even. And I know, and I'm like, and this is Starbucks, it's pretty progressive with it, but it was also new, and at the time it was very, kind of sadly frowned upon, in a public sense. And so in some ways I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we do now. We provide nursing spaces at, WordCamps. Or now for WordCamp US, we're looking into actually for the first time ever having childcare, which we've never done before. And that's, obviously some men, are caregivers and they stay at home, but it's really for women, because it's women mostly still have the primary care home giver put on to them. And so now, hopefully, we're working it out that we'll be providing childcare. But I think there's so much now with that. I know here in this space in Galvanize, we actually have a wellness room, but the idea for this room is for nursing moms. There's a fridge in there to be able to go in and pump and it not be a bathroom, which is just a big thing for me. And I'm like, when I think back, I'm a little like jelly, but at the same time, I'm like, I am so glad to be able to pioneer that. And if I had to go through that so that today women don't have to, then I'm very happy to. But I know in our community, it is a village, and some women bring their babies and we're just like, bring your baby, we'll help and things like that. So I'm more of a on-the-spot mentor and just, what can we do for you right now? Right now, what can we do? And that's kind of how I view myself so far. It's hard to think of myself as a voice at this moment, but I am definitely more than happy to be, and I would love to be, but it's a work in progress, I think.
And I didn't even think of that, like having to go into a bathroom, which is essentially a public bathroom.
Yeah.
To pump.
Right.
And it's, food that's going to, go into your baby's body.
It's liquid gold.
I've gathered that, based on some of the frustrations my sister has. And
I do have some, I think, controversial thoughts. I absolutely think it's very amazing of how there's a lot more empowering of women to get into tech, and there's organizations like Women in Tech, Outspoken Women, who the idea is to encourage it. Growing up, I felt safe in school with math and science, because for me, I'm a hybrid. So I'm a performing artist. I love it, but I'm also like, I also used to hate creative writing, hate it, and just my safe space was math and science, because, well, especially math, it either is or it isn't, and I felt like I could breathe with that, and science is very subjective, but still, it was a lot of numbers, and I loved that, and in the math and science world, it was mostly, men, boys or whatever, and And so I never had a problem with that. And I didn't mind that. But I recognize that I'm me and that I'm maybe the minority that way. And so a lot of women have, have been oppressed in that sense. And so that there's been this need to empower women to feel safe to be able to do that, because not everyone did feel that way. And so those are very, very, very helpful. And I love that. At the same time, I believe that in order to have true equality, there's going to be this balance of having to look at life in more of an androgynous sense, because it's not equality if we're now discriminating against what was the minority in order to get an even amount. At this, but I said there's this balance of and a need to make sure that the minority is being served to the fullest capacity without prejudice. And I'm 100% for that. But in a micro level, you think like you have two applications. And if we're really looking at it without any discrimination, we have to ignore gender. How do you do that? I don't even exactly know. But so to me, it's like, I love that more women are coming and that are feeling more and more safe to be able to do so. I love that we're empowering girls and teaching them that it's cool to love math, and maybe you're not just born that way. And by math, I'm associating that with technology, because it usually is, and I know math is different from development, and not necessarily mean code is math, but math and science, STEM, all that. And so to give girls that idea that it is cool and good is good, and I love that. But I do think that we need to still not be so one-sided, I guess. And it's not that it necessarily is the case, but it is just very delicate, I think, still. I know that I've gone through periods of my life where I'm like, girls suck, because they just are mean to me. And that's probably biased for me to, that's a lot of where it comes from. So I almost felt, this is being very vulnerable, I felt very safe around guys, because they weren't going to judge me and do all these things to me. And of course, that's not 100% true, because there's definitely guys that are like that, But over time, more and more, I feel like because women have been so empowered now, and of course this isn't always the case, and there still are some dinosaurs out there who can't let go of some things, but now women are becoming better with each other because of how much they feel safer and now empowered to do things. So it's like benefited everybody, and because we can feel like we don't have to rely on this old school mentality of like our life is home and drama, soaps, which is not how I grew up, but definitely my mom's generation, so now we get so much more, and it's actually taken away from the petty behaviors, that women have long shared with each other. So, but I would love to see more and more of, and I think that will happen. I think now more and more when women, the playing field starts to become even more even than it has, that I think more androgyny will be achieved then. So I do recognize that it is needed, that it's definitely needed.
Did you have any thoughts about WordPress 5 and Gutenberg as it evolved last year, or were you not really engaged much with that?
I was engaged some, and do have some thoughts. I know even for my company, it does affect us. I do see the move, and I'm okay with it. I think that technology moves fast, and that for WordPress to be competitive, I see that this is an angle we're going to play right now, and that it makes sense because Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, they all have some legit options, and more we meet people who, we used to be able to build them that small marketing site, and really, if they could just figure it out themselves, it's probably more cost effective for them. And so to be able to now offer something similar is probably a good thing. from being someone who's part of the community, I do very much see, that the lack of transparency really did hurt a lot of the community and in the way it was brought upon, and that is very important for our open source platform, or any open source platform, is the transparency. And so I think there was some, loosening of ties between the community and, the powers, and that we do need to move forward. But there's some legitimate concerns, and I think that they are legitimate, with the way we didn't have the best transparency and all of that. And so it's like, and I think most people actually agree, that we see Gutenberg as a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing. There are definitely some things that need to be fixed, but that's all technology, but we would definitely want to see better process in the future. And, and this is process we all expected to be in our platform, and rightfully so. So hopefully we'll learn and move forward, but I think we are a forgiving community, so I think that will happen.
What are your plans for the next year or so? What are you getting up to?
For this year so far, what I have on the docket is planning the community bazaar for WordCamp US. And that is it so far. This year came in strong with WordCamp Phoenix, so that has been all I've been doing so far is WordCamp Phoenix. But I will not be the lead for WordCamp Phoenix, so that'll be good. I'm, spreading my wings, so looking to see, for hire, so for event planning or for brand ambassadorship. So talking to a few companies, we'll see what happens there. But right now, I'm planning on sleeping for a little bit. One of my loves and passions and hobbies is dancing. So I have my first dance competition of this year, this actual weekend. So I'm gonna sleep a little bit this week and then go. Yeah, so doing that and holding down the fort for the local community. Definitely our local WordPress community here. So I could, just my thoughts on WordCamp Phoenix, how it went.
Yeah, let's definitely chat about that. How did it go?
It sucked. I'm just kidding. No, I was very pleased with our event. There were definitely some internal hiccups with our venue, but definitely makes for some great storytelling afterward. But I was so happy to see this idea I had of having this reunion come to fruition. And our after party last night was just over the top amazing. And I was so blown away by how many people we had involved with our dance. And for me, this idea of having this dance lesson in our tech community, knowing about our introverts and all that, it was a gamble, and I was blown away. It was so exciting to see everyone out there. And I was cracking up because I was like, whoa, being a dancer and doing these ballroom dance social times, you have, for every one male lead, there's maybe 3 female followers. And so to be in our community and have the majority of men out there, I was cracking up. It was so funny. I'm like, wow, this is actually a benefit for having so many guys. And of course, you could lead even if you're female or whatever, or some males follow. But being able to have those options was so cool. It was so cool. And I got a lot of good feedback, so I was very happy because there definitely were some checks from some of my team. I was like, do you really think people are going to dance? I'm like, I hope so. And they did. Did you see? Did you see over there at all? Yeah, it was fun.
Well, thanks again to Raquel for chatting with me at WordCamp Phoenix. She was incredibly busy, and as I mentioned, she's very involved in the community, so she managed to find the time to chat with us, which was really awesome. You can follow Raquel on Twitter at Raquel Landefeld, and that is, it's actually Raquel without an L, and then Landefeld, so it's RaqueLandefeld. You can follow Kathy Zant at Kathy Zant. You can follow me at MMAUNDER, Maunder. Mikey Veenstra is on Twitter at Hey It's Mikey V. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. That way you'll get an alert when we post a new podcast each week. And definitely like this video. It helps us get the word out and helps promote the podcast. And thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.